Every community is different, and designing an updated public library reflects that. You can't always meet every individual preference, but many libraries share similar concerns with their current buildings, and every architect will come across these scenarios as well. You're listening to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects, the podcast where we share our hands-on approach to projects and how we love to celebrate design that is boundless. I'm your host, Madison Mercado, a marketing coordinator at the firm, and in this second episode of our library design series, I'm sitting down with 3 of our library designers and architects that will share how they've approached the common concerns that communities across our 3 active projects have experienced and how the firm helps overcome them.
My name is David Leitman. I'm an architect here. My experience with libraries started before Finegold Alexander, where I worked on academic libraries for universities in New Jersey and North Carolina. So it's been interesting working on public libraries here at Finegold. Fun fact is that I love to bike ride, and I've done several long-distance bike rides through New England.
Hi, I'm Leah Wolkovich-Quartey. I am an associate on project architect at Finegold Alexander. I'm fairly new to library projects, but I do have a lot of experience with other institutional work, primarily schools and other public work. Fun fact about me, I love to cook and I love to garden. And the more we can do with the food that we grow and then get to cook, and I've been getting my kids into it, so that's been really fun, is growing our own stuff and then cooking as much as we can from scratch.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm an architectural designer here at Finegold Alexander. I am new to both libraries and to Finegold, but have worked entirely in the past on public work, including K through 12 schools, as well as public safety.
Nice. I'm glad to have all of you here today on What's the Scope, and glad to welcome you back, Leah, for another episode after our school series last year now. So I just want to get into our talk about libraries and specifically talking about the common concerns that a lot of clients and cities and towns have about their public library. In the last episode, I talked with Ellen and Josephine about what we do here at the firm and our experience working on public libraries in Massachusetts. And we now have the 3 of you here who are each on one of the projects that we have going on at the firm. And so I want to have each of you kind of like intro the projects you're working on, as well as what you enjoyed doing on them.
I can go first. So I am working on the JV Fletcher Library in Westford, Massachusetts. It's currently under construction, which is always exciting. It is an addition renovation project. The original building was built in the late 1890s, and then there was a significant renovation done in the 1980s, and then now we are building on that, keeping the 1890s in as much of that as we possibly can, taking off part of the 1980s bangs and then building, and then at the back of the building. Some of the driving forces behind the project were to maintain the historic facade on Main Street as much as possible. So we're really not doing a whole lot to what it looks like from Main Street, because it is such an important character really within Westford. Everybody knows what it looks like. Everybody knows the library. It's part of the town common. It's across from town hall. And it's just a really important part of the town. So all of the renovation that we're doing is on the back, but that's really to take the historic fabric of the building and then bring it up to the needs of the current community. So one major thing that we heard from the community when discussing this project was accessibility. So making sure that users of all ages and needs can get in and out of the library and around and access all that it has to offer. So that's a huge factor. And then really bringing more opportunities for the younger members of the town to be able to use the library. So we are redoing and increasing the volume of the children's area, and then having a dedicated teen area, because the teens do use this library a lot, but they don't have any space to call their own. So that's one of the cool parts of this new building, is that they're really going to have their own space. And then also introducing some dedicated study areas and a large meeting space for the community, and making it the community resource that it has always wanted to be.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting to see how people's needs change over the library's been around. Is it like 150 to, what was the year again?
Yeah, 1890 something.
Almost 150 years around there, yeah. So obviously people want different things and times change, you know.
So I had the privilege of working on Jones Library through design. It's currently in construction. I'm not involved with the construction team, but very similar has similar qualities to J.B. Fletcher, is that it's an existing library, originally built in the 1920s, and then there was an addition. There was a couple of additions, but the main addition in the 90s, and the building really hasn't been touched since then. And the library was really bursting at the seams with the amount of materials that they had, and they needed to reassess their collections in the space and how they operate, and provide kind of spaces for the needs for the future. And so the project essentially demolishes the 1990s edition, and the historic 1920s portion remains intact. And that faces Amity Street, which is right off the center of Amherst. And that's preserved. And then really mostly on the rear is the addition, which is a much larger building than they had, but is more harmonious to kind of the context of Amherst. In the project, there is a large meeting space for all the activities that happen there, as well as an enlarged children's space. They have also a large special collections area in the basement, numerous meeting spaces, and spaces for staff. There's also potential for a new cafe space for community to gather in the main lobby. Interesting thing about the building is that there's a very distinct character between the existing portion and the new addition, and part of the new addition actually encompasses the historic portion. So you'll see the old 1920s walls and roof when you're inside of the addition, which is an interesting historic piece of trying to kind of that shares that history with the architecture.
Yeah, that's really cool. Be able to see that from the inside.
And I think Waltham, on a similar thread to both of these projects, in some ways, is also a public library. Also has a historical building like J.B. Fletcher on Main Street, very integral to the historical fabric of the town in the downtown historical district. And it's really important to them that that fabric be maintained. So what we were looking at in our design is how do we leave, again, that Main Street facade kind of proud as it is, and then give the community what they need behind that, expand on the footprint they already have. This library community has a lot of different programs and a lot of services that they provide to their patrons. Kids are one of the biggest populations served here, and a lot of people come throughout the day and on weekends and events for the children's space. They host outdoor activities as well as story times and other things for the kids to do. That space will be expanded in the new option. There will be a new public meeting room for all the community to use for some of these larger events, both for children and for other programs that might want to come into the space. This library also serves over 1,000 free lunches to kids during the summer. So I think in a lot of ways, it boasts a lot more than just books and collections. And we look to expand many of those spaces with the new design. This library, again, is kind of bursting at the seams. They have so much going for them and so many people who really love this space, and they just need something bigger. Their original building was from 1914. They had an addition built on in the 30s and then a larger addition built onto the back that was 3 stories in the 90s. They are hoping to expand the footprint of the 90s and update it with all the services and programs the library needs today.
Can I just add, I think it's interesting because these 3 projects are so similar. Mm-hmm. They're existing buildings with historic character, and they're all getting additions or some partial additions or entirely new additions. And I think it just speaks to the work that we do at Finegold, the community work for the public, but also historic work on projects that mean a lot to people in the community that they're in. And I think that just kind of highlights the work that we do and the good work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to mention something similar because it is interesting how we end up kind of going after all of these projects that are very similar. Like almost all of the library projects, if not all of the other library projects that the firm has done, were also like renovations, additions to mostly historic buildings as well. This is something that everybody at the firm who works on the libraries is very familiar with, and knows how important these are for their respective towns, cities, etc. So I want to get into talking more specifically about certain concerns that towns have about their libraries. Leah, you kind of touched on the accessibility at JV Fletcher, and whether connected to that or not, I also want to talk about safety at the library and security for these communities as they're growing and their populations change and the needs also change. When you're working on the design for each of these libraries, how was safety and security taken into account to ensure that, if not forever, because you can't make a library work forever, but for the next 30, 50 years or so, that it does work for them in that regard?
I think big picture wise for all of the libraries, one of the challenges with safety and security is how do you enable that and have a safe, secure thing that doesn't feel off-putting or isolating or whatnot, because these are, as we've all already mentioned, community jewels, and they're for the community, and everyone's supposed to have access. Everybody's welcome. Everyone's supposed to feel really comfortable here. And some of our community members have called it their third space or their external living room, and that's really how these spaces are viewed. So how do you take that really comfortable feeling that you want everyone to have, but then make sure that everybody is going to be safe in this space? I think that's a conversation that we have on every project.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, it's a safe space for everyone, but when you think about, size of space, the lighting, sight lines, even material choice for durability and longevity, there are times where maybe some things aren't in alignment with the other. But specifically in library projects, like any public project, it has to be part of the conversation early on. You have to have an understanding from the building users, specifically in this case, the librarian, the head librarian and their staff, about what they're encountering daily, and then be mindful of those conditions and kind of how you're incorporating that into design. So thinking about how people are entering the building, how staff are greeting them or seeing them. So you want to it's in position of where that circ desk or the reference desk is located. Not only do you want to have eyes on the door, but then the stairs, the elevator, restrooms. And so there's this play of all these programmatic pieces that they all kind of want to be right next to each other, but practically it's not possible. So you have to be mindful of kind of where they're positioned, and then also sight lines to those other areas, the stacks, what's happening there, even study rooms, other gathering spaces. You just want to make sure that anyone who's there, whether it be someone with their family or someone studying individually, that if there was any issue, they can feel secure there. So sight lines is a big piece of that. We're constantly looking at how we're laying furniture out, how we're laying spaces out, how much glazing is there to ensure the sightlines are provided, but also being mindful of how staff walk through the library. You know, how are they doing their rounds, understanding position of shelving, etc.
Right. When you talk about sight lines, does that just mean like a shorter shelf instead of a taller shelf, and maybe like more open rooms instead of like a half wall in the middle?
Yes and yes. Yeah. So, there's in Jones, there was always a conversation of, okay, where are the stacks located? How wide are some of the walkways and positioning of the desk through to the other wall, the opposite side of the stacks. And then in conversations with other libraries, the height of the shelving was also so that knowing that if someone's walking up and down those aisles, that can be seen. But that is library to library in terms of kind of stack height, but it is a key part of that sightline.
Leah, again, you keep mentioning the things that I want to talk about next, so this is working out like that. You mentioned that libraries are third spaces, and for a lot of people, it is, because in towns, I don't really even know what else could be considered a third space other than a library or maybe a park. That's like a true public community space. But, and with that, a lot of communities have services they want to provide. Kate, you mentioned how Waltham gives out thousands of free lunches to students every summer. And you need a lot of space to be able to accommodate the lunches and the people moving in and out to serve them. And I'm kind of wondering about how you incorporate those different services that a library provides into the design, and to also a certain extent, how many services is too many, where you realize that you can't put everything all in one building. So how do you kind of work around that?
Well, I feel like at least in Waltham, they seem to be the hosts with the most, because they offer a plethora of programs that I think the community is just overjoyed and really grateful to have right at their fingertips. So in addition to the lunches, which I feel like they kind of just do front and center at their main entrance right now because it's what they have, they also offer a lot of employment outreach programs. So what that looks like for them is community representatives coming in, meeting with patrons who might be looking for jobs, looking at their skill sets, and kind of figuring out, okay, where can we fit, who has openings, and how can we facilitate you guys getting in for interviews. They have spaces currently where they'll host interviews at the library. It's kind of like a neutral meeting ground if maybe you don't want to meet at your house, but you also don't have the means to get into an office somewhere for the initial interview. They have a space where you can do that there in kind of a business development center. And in the new design, they'll have dedicated space for that type of thing, that when people come, there's a space for them to set up, sit down, and kind of engage with these services. They also offer things like a library of things, which is a thing I never knew existed, but you can get musical instruments and GoPro cameras and podcasting equipment and all sorts of things where you can pursue hobbies that might have been out of your means, or something you're just like, well, maybe I don't want to buy this because I don't know if I'm going to like it, but I want to try it. Like the library gives you all of those opportunities, which I think is a really special thing. Even a beach umbrella, if you just want to go enjoy a day, you could get that at the library too.
It's really fun.
The other thing that's fairly common, which is a great service that libraries offer that doesn't take a whole lot of space, is museum passes and discounts to other resources that we have in the area, which is fantastic. And the Library of Things is something that's getting fairly popular. And that's also, back to the space question, how many things do you have in your Library of Things, and who's maintaining the Library of Things? Because you want to make sure that if someone's going to borrow their beach umbrella, that it's going to open and it's going to function. So it's all of these things that make libraries such an awesome and interesting client, because they're doing all of these kind of unusual things for their community to make sure that everybody has these resources. We've heard stories of our librarians dressing up as favorite characters for themed days for the kids, and at Westford they do during finals weeks for the teens, they bring in snacks and food and things, and it's really a home away from home for the teens, which is also why this teen space was such a big need in Westford. So all of these libraries have such big hearts. They want to do everything for everybody. And these are the conversations that we have as designers, which, okay, we can only fit so much, but how do we make double use of spaces? How do we schedule things so that these folks can have the room now and these other folks can have it here, and we can stack stuff? So it is really a back and forth on how can we help them do all of the things that they're already doing better.
Yeah, and I think I second everyone's comments. And a couple things. In Jones, they have in Amherst, they have a high population of English as second language individuals. So they have, at Jones, we accommodated a English second language suite, essentially. There's 4 little classrooms, and I believe they have a full-time staff, or at least it's they at least have an office for this staff individual to support that. So yes, I think previously all these libraries are accommodating spaces that maybe 50 years ago you wouldn't think a library would have dedicated space for, and it's really important, not only for that community, but I think for the role that libraries are playing in our society and community. And I think the reason why libraries are third spaces, because if you think about a space that's open to anyone, can accommodate ages from 0 to 100, that the individuals, the librarians, the staff there are so, like, these are the people who like make libraries special, because they're so giving and so friendly and want to accommodate so many people. And that's what I think makes the library that third space for so many people.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more thing, and I think that's for a long time now, with more things going digital, and I know most of the libraries we work with have digital collections too, and those are a great resource for their community. But the conversation was, will libraries still be around with books being less common, people using their e-readers and whatnot? And I think what we've found is they're really coming into their own as these community spaces, and they're resources beyond just books. And, you know, a lot of times they're a place that people will go if they lose power, because a lot of our libraries have generators or air conditioning. If it's too hot, people can go hang out for a few hours if they don't have air conditioning at home. And there are so many simple things. Charge your phone, that you can just do at the library.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a fun follow-up to that. If any of you have a specific memory or something you liked about your town's library growing up, if you did go to it on a regular basis, or even now as adults too. You don't have to answer, but just wondering if anyone had anything to share.
I mean, I remember the library I went to growing up. They had this like grand, probably not so, if I went back, probably not so grand, but I remember it being so grand of an atrium. And you would like where the central stair was, and you take it down because the children's area was in the basement. And it just felt like you're kind of descending down into this like magical world. And then interestingly enough, on the exterior, there's a sunken courtyard. So like after we were at the library, we would go and like have our lunch and read the books that we checked out in this courtyard space adjacent to the library. And I really enjoyed doing that. So that's one of my library memories from growing up.
I don't remember my public library as much growing up. We did go, but not super often. But now I take my kids all the time, and it's kind of a special thing that I get to do with my oldest one. We go almost every week, and she picks out a huge stack of books, and we go and we sit and we read through a bunch of them, and then she decides which ones are going to stay at the library and which ones are going to go home. And we have a ton of books at home, but she still loves every week we go. And there's other things that the library offers as well with technology and whatnot, but we still spend most of our time sitting there reading books together. And now she reads to me sometimes, and it's just so cool to be able to share that.
I don't have any historical library memories because I don't believe that I went a lot when I was younger. But as an adult, I love to go. And I really enjoy some of these new spaces. We've been talking about like maker spaces and other things. Like even just the adult fiction books are things that maybe I wouldn't pick up myself, but when I see them featured, I'll read the back and say, okay, you're coming home with me. So it's a great thing, I think, like you were saying, can accommodate ages 0 to 100, where there really is always something for everybody, and they're usually a very pleasant space to be in.
Yeah. I know, I didn't go too much to a public library when I was younger, and if we did, it was just like check out a book and leave. We didn't really stay.
Yeah, me too.
But as an adult, I feel like those extra services are what makes the library more useful to me. Like I was just there yesterday to go print out some things because I don't own a printer.
Yeah, and you get free printing.
And it's
Great resource.
And it was free.
Wow, free.
25 free pages a day at the Cambridge Libraries.
Oh, who knew?
I know.
Oh, my goodness.
You know now.
I didn't know that.
You know now.
Yeah, for the Boston ones, they give you like $20 worth of credit at the beginning of every month. So, and then you can add on more if you need, but free basically, because I did not use $20 worth of printing.
Yeah, I also don't own a printer, so when I was like, oh, I need to go print my lease or go print something else, like
exactly what I
scoot right down to the library, take a bus door to door. We love public services. I do, at least.
Yeah.
Yes, me too. To kind of build off of that, the longevity of public services is something that we all want to see moving forward, especially in a library, because it helps so many people in a community, and it's such a important resource for a lot of people. And even aside from the community, I kind of want to talk about the longevity of the library building itself. So things like, how do you prepare for how many shelves that they're going to need 30, 50 years down the line? And how do you prepare for, or how do you know to put in a good mechanical system that'll hopefully last you 30 years, and things like that are more about the building rather than the community.
So the thing about libraries, and we've been acknowledging that like things change, what the community needs change, and maybe how the space is used, we've seen has changed, and we know libraries will probably continue to evolve. And so the library of 15 years from now probably will be very different what we have now. And so with that, you have to design a building knowing that there may be changes down the road. And that's when designing a library, that's where you try and put stacks together instead of just kind of little islands throughout the building. You ensure that you have these large swaths of space that if there was changes, stacks could modify if needed without making changes to walls. But you acknowledge that walls might have to be modified at some time. So you try and coordinate kind of placement of maybe study rooms against glass or other locations. And that's why it's also like clear if there's a central corridor connecting an entryway to the reference desk to then connect to other smaller spaces. The one thing I think about often is when positioning stacks, and you think about the stacks and the lighting of the stacks, because it's easier to revise stacks than it is the walls. And so you want the lighting to be perpendicular to the shelving layout, so that if the shelving were modified, whether the aisle widths got wider or more narrow and things had a shift, you don't have to make changes to the lighting above. And so by doing that, I think the important to note is by doing that, you still ensure that there's proper lighting along all of the aisles of the stacks. Because if they were parallel, then there might be some instances where certain aisles would be in the dark. So you really, so that's why you have to be kind of coordinate with the library in terms of, okay, how are you envisioning the space? And then coordinate with the lighting and understand, okay, there is flexibility for that shelving over time.
And I think kind of just building off David's theme of layout, the MBLC is an organization that we work with on all of our public libraries. And their role really is to help us ensure that the design criteria are being met and that the library has everything they need today and tomorrow and for the next 30 years. I know, Madison, you asked a little bit about where those 30-year numbers come from. It's an MBLC formula that kind of makes those projection calculations of how many volumes are you going to have, what type of books, how many user seats do you need, how many lounge seats do you want to have, and that kind of thing. It all kind of comes from a formula. And then from then, we work with the libraries directly and say, okay, these are numbers. Do these work for you? How do they look? And we kind of go and refine from there. And another, I think, key thing that we've been keeping in mind a lot as we design the Waltham Library is that, as David said, things might be worked on, layouts might change, and things might be flexible. So keeping stairs and toilet rooms kind of off to the side in a peripheral way. That way, if they wanted to rearrange study rooms or interior spaces, it's not kind of ripping out floors and changing plumbing. It's a more minimal renovation. So kind of giving a space that functions for today, but also one that's not going to be a whole can of worms to change, in 10 years if your needs drastically change, is something that we're thinking about as we go through every phase of design.
I mean, absolutely everything that Kate and David have already said, but it also goes down to how things are displayed, because technology has changed so much in the past few decades, and it's going to continue, and how things get displayed, and working with the libraries to determine how specific they want to be with displaying some of the stuff that we don't know how long it's going to be around. So we really try to advocate for flexibility as much as possible, and trying to do things the simplest way with straight shelving and things that offer options if their collections change, or even as simple as how they're displaying, especially things for children, whether it's a dedicated, like, this is very specific, but a rod system with hanging plastic bags, that's very different and specific compared to just your standard library shelves that could be used for magazines or books or DVDs or any number of things. So trying to keep it as simple so that it is more universal, so that the library can grow more easily and not have to replace its shelving when in 10 years nobody uses DVDs anymore.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge sometimes with these historical buildings is there's many things you can't change about a historical building, whether because it's cost prohibitive or you just don't want to do it because it's historic and it's beautiful. And a lot of times making these new spaces that are a lot more flexible actually allows us to return the spaces in the historical buildings back to their original use. So sometimes reading rooms that have now been kind of museum type of rooms or might house AV collections can now once again be like a pretty silent reading room, kind of the way it was when the library was first built, because we have space for those fun programs and programs that need displays and other things. So I just think that's like an interesting circle that I'm kind of seeing with some of our projects, that in giving a bigger, more flexible space, we're actually able to return the historical to kind of how it was intended to be used, partially, not always, not fully, but partially. And those are often the most beautiful spaces in the building that just don't work sometimes because they're smaller or the sight lines don't work or for whatever reason.
If I can just piggyback off that, in Jones, there are several spaces that were originally used or designed as large reading rooms, but since it's just full of shelving. And we have some interesting kind of images, I think, from the 50s, and there's a bunch of people there using the space as a reading room, but then today, or at least right before construction started, the shelving, you couldn't even see the murals that were on the wall that was kind of so prominent in that space. And we're envisioning that when the project is open back to the public, that is again a reading room. So yeah, bringing those spaces back to kind of their intended use and really showcasing what these spaces were originally for.
That's really nice, and I'm sure it will be nice for the communities as well to have a newer space to them, I guess, quote unquote. I think I just have one more question that I want to ask you all. This series is about libraries, and while the library sector is primarily about libraries, you have all worked on schools in the past, and schools usually also include a small library in them. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how does working on a school library compared to a public library or any other type of library that you might have worked on in the past that's not a public building?
So I think an interesting trend that we're starting to see in some school projects is the idea of distributed media. So instead of having a traditional closed off library, it's trying to find ways that the library actually extends and occupies the entire building so that there's opportunities for learning and books throughout the school. And I think that ties back to this whole conversation we've been having about libraries and books being a community resource, and how do you get that to as many people as possible. And so by having more smaller pockets, it just allows more opportunity for students to just have that available at their fingertips. So while the approaches are a bit different between a public library and a school library, it's really that idea of how do we make this knowledge accessible to the most number of people possible and make them just embrace it and feel comfortable and have different places to sit and use these resources.
I would say that my only other thought was, I thought it was interesting when we were talking about kind of security of public buildings and how that influences things. And I think in addition to the scale being different between a high school library and a public library, I think also the safety factor is just a little bit different in a high school, because I mean, at a baseline you have your main entrance, which is usually a super secured point that everyone has to pass through in order to enter the building, where sometimes in libraries you might have multiple entries. And also I think that they prioritize maybe different things, so it's digital media versus books, and just some things, like Leah said, that work for their community that might be younger people, more digitally focused, that they kind of say, okay, we have all our students in, we know where they are, this is where they're going to be, versus a library where your staff is a lot more maybe active, going around and making sure that the space is comfortable and secure.
I think that's all I had so far then for this episode. Is there anything else anybody would like to add about anything library related to what we talked about today?
Go get your library cards.
Isn't it Library Month?
If you don't have one, go get one.
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes.
Library Lovers Month is what they call it. I think it's because the actual day is also Valentine's Day, so they call it Library Lovers.
How poetic of them.
Yeah.
Support your local library.
All right, I think that's all I had. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Madison.
Thank you for listening to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects. This episode was produced and edited by Madison Mercado with music from the YouTube Music Library. Tune in next week to hear about the creative approaches the firm has to take when working around historic buildings. Find us at fainc.com and connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Finegold Alexander Architects. See you next week.